The crack of a gunshot echoed across the plains of Wyoming Territory as Flynn Porter ducked behind a boulder, his heart pounding against his ribs like a wild Mustang. It was 1878, and the last place he expected to find himself was pinned down by bandits while transporting supplies to his newly purchased ranch. "Damn it all to hell," Flynn muttered, checking the chambers of his Colt revolver, 3 bullets left. The outlaws had ambushed him just before dusk, killing his horse and forcing him to retreat into the rocky terrain on foot. His provisions were scattered across the trail behind him, and night was falling fast. A voice called out from the darkening landscape. "Give it up, stranger." "Ain't worth dying over some goods." Flynn peered around the edge of the boulder, squinting into the fading light. He could make out 2 figures on horseback about 50 yards away, silhouetted against the purple-orange sunset. There had been 3 of them earlier. Where was the third? The answer came with the cold press of steel against the back of his neck. "Stand up slow, cowboy," a voice commanded, distinctly feminine but hard as iron. Flynn raised his hands and rose to his feet, turning gradually to face his captor. His eyes widened at the sight of a woman holding a Winchester rifle with unwavering steadiness. Her face was partially concealed by a bandana, but her eyes caught the dying light, fierce, intelligent, and the color of whiskey. "You're with them?" Flynn asked, nodding toward the riders in the distance. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Not exactly." In one swift motion, she fired 2 shots over his shoulder. The riders scattered with startled shouts, disappearing into the growing darkness. "They'll be back with more men," she said, lowering her bandana to reveal a face smudged with trail dust but striking nonetheless. "If you want to live, you'd best come with me." Flynn hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Flynn Porter, I've got a ranch about 10 miles south of here." "Violet Dawson," she replied, already moving swiftly across the rocky ground. "And your ranch might as well be in California for all the good it does you tonight. My cabin's just over that ridge." Flynn followed her through the darkness, occasionally glancing back for signs of pursuit. "Those men. They after you for something?" Violet paused to listen to the night sounds before continuing. "Those men work for Elias Montgomery. He wants my land, thinks there's gold on it." She glanced at him. "What's your excuse for being out here alone, Mr. Porter?" Supply run to Medicine Bow. "Was heading back when they jumped me." Flynn stumbled slightly on the uneven ground, his body aching from the fall from his horse earlier. "Lost everything." They crested a small hill, and Flynn saw a modest cabin nestled against a stand of pines. A thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, barely visible against the night sky. "You live out here alone?" he asked, following her down the slope. "My pa died last winter," she answered matter-of-factly. "It's just me now." The cabin was sparsely furnished but clean, with a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed in the corner. A curtain sectioned off a portion of the single room, presumably for privacy. The walls were decorated with a few charcoal sketches, landscapes mostly, but quite skillfully done. "You draw these?" Flynn asked, studying a rendering of the mountain range to the west. Violet didn't answer, busy securing the door and checking the windows. "We should be safe for tonight. They won't risk tracking in the dark." She hung her rifle on pegs above the door and removed her hat, releasing a cascade of chestnut hair that fell past her shoulders. In the lamplight, Flynn could see her more clearly. She was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 22 or 23, with a smattering of freckles across her nose and a small scar above her right eyebrow. "You hungry?" she asked abruptly, moving to the stove where a pot was simmering. Flynn suddenly became aware of the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. "Starving," he admitted. "Sit," she ordered, gesturing to the table. "It's just beans and rabbit, nothing fancy." Flynn sank into the chair, wincing at the soreness in his muscles. "After the day I've had, beans and rabbit sound like a feast fit for a king." A ghost of a smile touched Violet's lips as she stirred the pot. "You said you have a ranch. You new to these parts? Bought it 3 months ago. Previous owner was heading to Oregon, wanted to sell quick. Got it for a fair price." Flynn watched as she efficiently moved around the small space. "It's not much yet, but I've got plans. Good grazing land, plenty of water." "Most men around here don't last a year," Violet remarked bluntly, ladling the stew into 2 wooden bowls. "Winter's harsh, and Montgomery's men make it harder." "I'm not most men," Flynn replied simply. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden noise outside, the distinct sound of a horse's whinny. Violet immediately extinguished the lamp and moved silently to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "See anything?" Flynn whispered, hand moving to his revolver. After a tense moment, Violet's shoulders relaxed. "Just a wild Mustang. The herd sometimes comes through here at night for the spring below the cabin." They ate in relative silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional pop from the stove's fire. Flynn found himself studying his unexpected host when she wasn't looking the way she held herself. Alert even in repose, the calluses on her hands speaking of hard work, the occasional distant look in her eyes suggesting a story much deeper than she was sharing. "You draw well," Flynn said finally, nodding toward the sketches. Violet followed his gaze. "Pa taught me, said it was important to see the beauty in things, even out here." She rose to clear the bowls. "You can take the bed, I'll sleep by the stove." Flynn shook his head. "I'll take the floor. I've slept on worse." Violet seemed about to argue but nodded instead. "Suit yourself, I've got extra blankets." As they prepared for the night, Flynn found himself wondering about the strange turn his day had taken. From ambush to refuge in the home of a solitary woman who handled a rifle like she'd been born with it and drew landscapes with the skill of a trained artist. "How long have you been out here?" he asked as she handed him some blankets. "All my life," Violet replied. "Pa brought me and Ma out when I was just a baby. Ma died when I was 8, fever." She said it matter-of-factly, but Flynn caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "I'm sorry," he offered. Violet nodded once, a curt acknowledgement of his sympathy. "Get some sleep, Mr. Porter. We'll need to move at first light if we're going to get you back to your ranch without Montgomery's men finding us." Flynn arranged his makeshift bed near the stove while Violet disappeared behind the privacy curtain. As he lay in the darkness, listening to the soft sounds of the cabin settling and the distant cry of a coyote, he realized this was the first time since arriving in Wyoming Territory that he'd spent the night under a roof that wasn't his own. Morning came with the soft golden light filtering through the cabin's small windows. Flynn awoke to find Violet already dressed and preparing coffee, her hair tied back neatly, her movements efficient and purposeful. "There's water in the basin if you want to wash," she said without turning. "We should leave within the hour." Flynn sat up, running a hand through his disheveled sandy brown hair. "I appreciate all this," he said. "Not everyone would help a stranger." Violet finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Out here, helping when you can is sometimes the difference between life and death." She poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to him. "Besides, anyone Montgomery's men are against can't be all bad." After a quick breakfast of cornbread and more coffee, they set out. Violet led the way on a sturdy paint mare, while Flynn rode a somewhat temperamental gelding she called Diablo. "He's got spirit," she explained as the horse sidestepped nervously beneath him. "But he's sure-footed in rough country." They took a circuitous route, avoiding the main trails and keeping to the cover of trees and ravines when possible. Violet clearly knew the land intimately, navigating with confidence through areas that appeared, to Flynn's eyes, virtually identical. "How do you know which way to go?" he asked after they'd been riding for several hours. Violet pointed to subtle landmarks, a distinctive bend in a distant creek, the shape of a particular hill, the pattern of rocks along a ridge. "You have to read the land," she explained. "It tells you everything you need to know if you pay attention." By midday, they had covered significant ground without encountering anyone. They paused in a sheltered grove to rest the horses and eat some jerky Violet had packed. "Your ranch isn't far now," she said, studying the horizon. "Maybe 2 hours if we keep a steady pace." Flynn nodded, watching her profile against the sky. "You know, I could use some help getting established. Someone who knows the territory can handle themselves." The offer came spontaneously, but as soon as he said it, he knew he meant it. Violet turned to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Porter?" "Flynn," he corrected. "And yes, I suppose I am. Fair wages, a place to stay if you want it." He hesitated. "I know you have your own place, but—" "Well, you said yourself Montgomery wants your land. Might be safer elsewhere, at least for a while." Violet's face closed like a shutter. "I don't run from men like Montgomery." She stood, brushing dust from her trousers. "We should keep moving." The rest of the journey passed in relative silence. As they approached Flynn's property, marked by a simple wooden gate with Porter Ranch burned into the crossbeam, Violet pulled her horse to a stop. "This is where I leave you," she said. Flynn looked at her, then at his modest ranch house in the distance. A barn stood nearby and a small corral held a few horses. It wasn't much yet, but it was his. "At least come in for a meal before you head back," he offered. "It's the least I can do." Violet hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but I need to be back before dark." As they rode into the yard, Flynn felt a strange sense of pride showing Violet his place, modest though it was. The main house was simple but solid, built of hewn logs with a stone chimney. The barn needed work, but it was serviceable. "It's a good piece of land," Violet acknowledged as they dismounted. "Good water source sheltered from the north winds." Inside, the house was sparsely furnished but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living area with a small bedroom off to one side. Flynn immediately set about lighting the stove and rummaging through his limited supplies. "I'm not much of a cook," he admitted, "but I can manage beans and bacon." Violet leaned her rifle against the wall and removed her hat. "I can help. Seems fair after you ate my cooking." They worked together preparing the simple meal, moving around each other in the small space with surprising ease. Flynn found himself enjoying her company, the way she didn't feel the need to fill silence with meaningless talk, the quiet competence in everything she did. As Flynn attempted to fry the bacon, however, his attention wandered to Violet as she kneaded dough for biscuits. Her sleeves rolled up to reveal strong, tanned forearms. The bacon sizzled and popped, smoke beginning to rise. "Your bacon's burning," Violet pointed out, nodding toward the pan where the meat was now charring at the edges. "Damn it," Flynn muttered, grabbing for the handle and nearly burning himself in the process. He awkwardly tried to salvage the smoking mess. "This isn't the first time, is it?" Violet asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Flynn looked sheepish. "I burn more meals than I care to admit. Nearly set the place on fire last week trying to make flapjacks." Violet laughed then, a genuine sound that transformed her face. She moved beside him and gently took the pan from his hands. "Here," she said, her fingers brushing his as she took control of the situation. With practiced ease, she rescued what bacon could be saved and expertly managed the rest of the cooking. Flynn found himself watching her, captivated by the confidence in her movements, the small smile that occasionally touched her lips as she worked. "A man who can't cook out here is a man who's going to starve," she commented, sliding the biscuits into the oven. "I manage," Flynn defended himself. "Just not elegantly." They sat down to eat, and Flynn was struck by how natural it felt, sharing a meal with this woman he'd known for less than a day. The food was simple but good, and the conversation flowed more easily now. "How'd you end up in Wyoming Territory?" Violet asked, breaking a biscuit in half. "You don't strike me as someone born to this life," Flynn considered the question. "My father was a banker in St. Louis, expected me to follow in his footsteps. I tried it for a few years but felt like I was suffocating." He took a sip of water. "When he died, I took my inheritance and decided to try something completely different, something real." "And is it real?" Flynn looked around the modest cabin, then back at Violet. "More real than anything I've ever done. Hard as hell, but I don't regret it." As they finished eating, Flynn noticed Violet glancing at the window, tracking the sun's position. "You could stay," he found himself saying. "Just for tonight. It's getting late to ride back alone." Violet hesitated, clearly torn. "I shouldn't, my place." "We'll still be there tomorrow," Flynn finished for her. "And I've got that spare room I mentioned. No strings attached, just a safe place for the night." After a moment's consideration, Violet nodded. "All right, but I'll leave at first light." That evening, they sat on Flynn's small porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of amber and gold. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. "It's beautiful here," Violet said finally. "Different from my place." "More open," Flynn nodded. "That's what struck me when I first saw it, all that space, all that possibility." He glanced at her. "Your sketches capture that feeling, the vastness of it all." Violet looked surprised. "Thank you, not many people understand that." "My mother was an artist," Flynn explained. "Nothing professional, but she loved to paint. Taught me to appreciate the way art can capture something words can't." The conversation flowed easily after that, ranging from practical matters of ranch management to more personal revelations. Flynn learned that Violet had taught herself to read from her mother's small collection of books, that she'd once traveled as far as Denver but preferred the solitude of her mountain home, that her favorite time of day was dawn when the world felt new and untouched. In turn, he told her about his disastrous first attempt at breaking a wild horse, his secret enjoyment of poetry that would have scandalized his banking colleagues, his dream of building a ranch that could sustain itself without destroying the land around it. Night had fallen completely when they finally moved inside. Flynn built up the fire in the stove while Violet prepared the spare room, which until now had mostly stored extra supplies. "It's not much," Flynn apologized, showing her the small space with its narrow bed and single window. "It's fine," Violet assured him. "Better than many places I've slept." Before retiring, they shared a last cup of coffee at the kitchen table. The lamplight cast a warm glow over Violet's features, softening the watchful hardness that seemed to be her default expression. "That offer still stands," Flynn said quietly. "About working here, no pressure, just if you wanted to." Violet studied her cup for a long moment. "Why would you trust me so quickly? You barely know me." "Sometimes you just know when someone fits," Flynn replied honestly. "Besides, you saved my life. That counts for something." Morning came with a gentle rain tapping on the roof. Flynn awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the kitchen. He found Violet fully dressed, her pack ready by the door, cooking breakfast on the stove. "You're up early," he commented, running a hand through his sleep-mussed hair. "Old habits," she replied, sliding eggs onto 2 plates. "Thought I'd make us breakfast before I head out." They ate quickly, both aware of the day stretching before them and the decisions to be made. When they finished, Violet rose to gather her things. "I should go, the rain's letting up." Flynn nodded, following her to the door. "Will I see you again?" he asked directly. Violet paused, her hand on the doorknob. "I don't know, maybe." "I meant what I said about the job," Flynn pressed. "And I'd like to know you better, Violet Dawson." Something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or a glimmer of the same interest he was feeling. But before she could answer, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. Flynn moved to the window, peering out cautiously. 3 riders were approaching the gate, and he recognized one of them as the man who had led the ambush against him 2 days earlier. "Montgomery's men," Violet confirmed, having joined him at the window. "They must have tracked me here." Flynn's jaw tightened. "Stay inside, I'll handle this." Violet gave him a look that clearly questioned his sanity. "We'll handle it together." They stepped onto the porch as the riders approached. The leader, a scar-faced man with a drooping mustache, reined in his horse and spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Well, well. If it ain't the Dawson girl and her new friend." His voice was gravelly, his eyes cold. "Boss wants a word with you, Miss Dawson, about that land of yours." Flynn stepped slightly forward, his hand near his holstered revolver. "This is private property. You're not welcome here." The scarred man laughed, an ugly sound. "Ain't asking permission, cowboy. The lady's coming with us one way or another." "I think not," came a new voice. From around the corner of the house appeared a tall man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. Behind him were 2 deputies, all with rifles ready. "Sheriff Davis," the scarred man acknowledged, his demeanor immediately changing. "We're just having a friendly conversation." "Looks more like trespassing and intimidation to me, Jenkins," the sheriff replied calmly. "Mr. Montgomery's influence doesn't extend to breaking the law in my jurisdiction." A tense standoff ensued, with Jenkins and his men clearly calculating their odds. Finally, with a venomous look at Flynn and Violet, Jenkins jerked his horse around. "This ain't over," he warned before riding away, his men following. Sheriff Davis approached the porch, tipping his hat to Violet. "Miss Dawson, been a while since you've come to town." "Sheriff," she acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you out this way?" "Got word Montgomery's men were causing trouble again. Thought I'd check on Mr. Porter here, being new to the area." The sheriff's eyes moved between them with interest. "Didn't expect to find you here, though." After the sheriff and his deputies departed, promising to keep an eye on the situation, Flynn and Violet found themselves alone again. "Seems Montgomery's reach is longer than I thought," Violet said grimly. "They'll be watching your place now, too." Flynn leaned against the porch railing, considering. What exactly does Montgomery want with your land? Is there really gold? Violet shook her head. Not gold. Water. My property controls access to the main water source for this part of the valley. In a dry year, whoever controls that water controls everything, she sighed. Pa knew it. It's why he never sold no matter what they offered. And now they're trying to force you out, Flynn concluded. They've been trying for years, Violet confirmed. But today they crossed a line coming here. Flynn straightened, a decision forming. Then let's end it. What do you mean? I mean we go to town, talk to the sheriff properly, file formal complaints. Montgomery may have influence, but from what I've seen of Sheriff Davis, he's an honest man. Violet looked skeptical. Legal channels don't always work out here. Then we try anyway, Flynn insisted, and if that fails… He paused. We find another way. The ride to Medicine Bow was tense, both of them alert for any sign of Montgomery's men. The town itself was bustling with its usual activity, cowboys fresh off the trail looking for entertainment, merchants hawking their wares, the regular citizens going about their daily business. At the sheriff's office, they found Davis reviewing wanted posters. He looked up as they entered, not appearing surprised to see them. Miss Dawson, Mr. Porter, expected you might come by. Flynn explained the situation fully, the ambush, the threats, the long history of intimidation against Violet and her father. The sheriff listened attentively, occasionally making notes. Montgomery's careful, Davis said when they'd finished. Never does his dirty work himself, always keeps just enough distance to maintain deniability. He tapped his pencil against the desk thoughtfully. But intimidation and attempted kidnapping, that's something I can work with. A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, they could see a group of men dismounting in front of the saloon across the street. At their center was a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, expensively dressed despite the frontier setting. Speak of the devil, the sheriff muttered. Elias Montgomery himself. Flynn felt Violet tense beside him. Without thinking, he placed his hand over hers where it rested on her knee. She didn't pull away. Now might be a good time for a direct conversation, Flynn suggested. All parties present, witnesses around. The sheriff considered this, then nodded slowly. Could work. Public setting keeps things civil, at least. The confrontation that followed in the town's main street would be talked about in Medicine Bow for years to come. Montgomery, faced with direct accusations in front of the town's citizens, maintained his composure but was clearly caught off guard by the united front presented by Violet, Flynn, and Sheriff Davis. These are serious allegations, Miss Dawson, Montgomery said smoothly. My men sometimes show excessive enthusiasm, but I assure you, I've given no orders to harm anyone. Your men tried to abduct Miss Dawson from my property this morning, Flynn countered. That goes beyond excessive enthusiasm. The public nature of the confrontation had drawn a crowd, and Flynn noticed that many of the townspeople were watching with evident interest and surprisingly support for Violet's position. It seemed Montgomery wasn't as universally respected as he might have believed. Perhaps we can reach an accommodation, Montgomery finally offered, his expression calculating. A fair price for your land, Miss Dawson, more than fair. Violet's chin lifted. The land isn't for sale, not to you, not to anyone. Everyone has their price, Montgomery insisted. Not me, Violet replied firmly, but I am willing to negotiate water rights, fair access fairly priced. This unexpected proposal caught Montgomery off guard. The crowd murmured with interest, and Flynn could see several ranchers nodding in approval. Water rights, Montgomery repeated. Supervised by the territorial authorities, Sheriff Davis added, legal, binding, and fair to all parties. The negotiation that followed was tense but productive. By sunset, a preliminary agreement had been drafted by the town's lawyer. Montgomery would have access to the water source on Violet's land for his cattle operations, paying a reasonable fee, while Violet would retain ownership and primary rights. The sheriff would ensure compliance, backed by newly documented evidence of Montgomery's men's previous intimidation tactics as leverage. As they prepared to leave town, the setting sun painting the street in gold and shadow, Flynn found himself standing close to Violet by the hitching post. That was brave, he said quietly, finding a solution instead of continuing the fight. Violet adjusted her horse's saddle strap, not meeting his eyes. Pa always said the smartest battles are the ones you don't have to fight. She finally looked up at him. Thank you for standing with me. Always, Flynn replied without hesitation. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. The ride back was quieter, both of them processing the day's events. As they approached the fork where the trail split one path leading to Flynn's ranch, the other to Violet's cabin, they slowed their horses. You could stay, Flynn said, the words emerging before he could second-guess them. Just for dinner. I promise not to burn it. A small smile tugged at Violet's lips. Are you sure? Your cooking record isn't exactly promising, Flynn laughed. Actually, I was hoping you might take pity on me and help. Her smile widened. I suppose I could do that. At the ranch, they worked together preparing a simple meal. Flynn managed to burn the beans despite his best efforts, smoke filling the small kitchen as he cursed colorfully. Violet moved beside him, gently taking the pan from his hands. The cowboy burned supper again, she said, but there was no mockery in her tone, only a soft amusement. She looked up at him, and something in her expression made Flynn's heart skip a beat. I'm starting to think you do this on purpose, she added, a teasing light in her eyes. Flynn grinned sheepishly. Maybe I just like watching you save the day. Their eyes held for a long moment, the burned beans forgotten. Slowly, tentatively, Flynn reached up to brush a strand of hair from Violet's face. She didn't pull away. I meant what I said, he murmured, about wanting to know you better. Violet placed the pan back on the stove, then turned to face him fully. I've spent most of my life keeping people at a distance, she admitted. It's safer that way. And now, Flynn asked, she took a deep breath as if making a monumental decision. Now I'm thinking maybe safe isn't always better. The weeks that followed saw a gradual but unmistakable shift in their relationship. Violet began spending more time at Flynn's ranch, helping with chores, offering advice on cattle management, sometimes staying overnight in the spare room. They established a rhythm, working side by side during the day, sharing meals and conversation in the evenings. Violet maintained her own property as well, dividing her time between the two places. Flynn often accompanied her, helping with repairs to her cabin and learning the intricacies of the water system her father had ingeniously developed. The agreement with Montgomery held, with occasional tensions but no further violence. The community, seeing the resolution, began to accept Flynn more readily as one of their own rather than an outsider from the East. One evening, nearly 2 months after their first meeting, Flynn and Violet sat on his porch watching a spectacular sunset. A comfortable silence stretched between them, the kind that comes from genuine compatibility rather than lack of things to say. I've been thinking, Flynn said finally, about expanding the house. Adding a proper dining room, maybe another bedroom or two. Violet glanced at him. Planning for the future, hoping for it, Flynn replied, gathering his courage. Violet, these past weeks, they've been the best of my life, and it's because of you. She turned to face him fully, her expression serious but soft. Flynn, I'm not asking for promises, he hurried to clarify. I know we're still getting to know each other, but I do know that I want you in my life, however you want to be in it. Violet was quiet for so long that Flynn began to worry he'd misspoken. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand in hers. I've never met anyone like you, she said quietly. Someone who sees me as I am and doesn't try to change me, who respects my independence but still offers support. She squeezed his hand. I'm not good at talking about feelings, but I do know I'm happier when I'm with you. Flynn felt his heart soar. Carefully, he leaned forward, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the meeting of lips. When they parted, Violet smiled a full, unreserved smile that transformed her entire face. Maybe we could try cooking dinner together again, she suggested. See if you can manage not to burn it this time. Flynn laughed, pulling her closer. I make no promises. Besides, some of our best moments have come from my culinary disasters. 5 years later, the Porter Ranch had grown considerably. The main house was now a comfortable 2-story structure, with a spacious kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and even a small study where Violet's drawings hung alongside maps of their expanded property. The original cabin had been converted into a bunkhouse for the handful of ranch hands they employed. The operation had prospered, with a healthy herd of cattle, productive fields, and a reputation for fair dealing throughout the territory. The water rights agreement had become a model for other disputes, with Flynn and Violet occasionally called upon to mediate similar conflicts. Their personal life had flourished as well. They had married 3 years earlier in a simple ceremony attended by the entire community, including Sheriff Davis and, surprisingly, Elias Montgomery, whose relationship with them had evolved into a grudging respect. On this particular evening, Flynn was attempting to prepare a special anniversary dinner while their 2-year-old son, James, played on a blanket near the kitchen table. Violet was expected back soon from a ride to check on the north pasture. As usual, Flynn's culinary efforts were not going according to plan. The venison was overcooking, the potatoes remained stubbornly undercooked, and the biscuits had somehow managed to be both burnt on top and doughy inside. When Violet entered, she found her husband frantically trying to salvage the meal, his face flushed with exertion and frustration. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene the man she loved, their beautiful son, their home built with hard work and dedication. Without a word, she crossed the room, kissed Flynn on the cheek, and gently took the pan from his hands. "The cowboy burned supper again," she said with a soft smile, her eyes filled with love and amusement. Flynn wrapped his arms around her from behind as she expertly rescued what could be saved of the meal. "Some things never change," he murmured against her hair. Violet turned in his embrace, rising on her toes to kiss him properly. "And some things get better every day." As they stood together in their kitchen, their son babbling happily nearby, the Wyoming sunset painting the sky outside their window, both knew they had found something rare and precious in this wild frontier, a partnership of equals, built on respect, understanding, and an enduring love that had begun, improbably, with a burnt supper and a softly offered smile.